All right, so I brought my final major element in, this chocolate, and I want to figure out how to use it. And I'm placing it, and it's still a smart layer. So I can scale it larger, smaller. I want it to kind of be in the foreground. I'd love to see more of this though. So I'm gonna, because it's organic, I'm gonna play with it a little bit more than I usually would with photo reference. And I might do a perspective shift, because we're looking, the photo is looking down at the chocolate. And so I'm going to flatten that space a little bit so it's more like we're looking across it and it's coming out at us. See that? So those rocks can kind of fit more believably with this scene. Let's try it there. Then I'm going to get rid of, well, let's just do an easy cutout first. Mostly I know I only need this stuff. I actually like how the countertop here looks kind of like water. And I might even be able to sell that as water and extend my composition, make it a really, like almost a panoramic. We will see. Now that I've selected it, because it's a smart layer, I'm going to make a duplicate. That gives me a rasterized cutout that then I can cut from. Now notice how this is done with a macro lens. You know, this is a chocolate bar. So notice how fuzzy that is. So I really don't want a lot of that. I'm going to cut around it. And I'm going to be pretty aggressive here. And just using the edges of the chocolate I want to keep. Do a rough cutout first. That will help me position it. Try moving my guide down a little bit. Re-envision the whole scene. And now cut out a little bit more. Refined. I want to get a little bit more of that water in there. There we go. That helps. And I want to only keep the parts of the chocolate, for the most part, that are in strong focus. And you can always ride along the shadows. You know, cut within the shadows rather than in the midtones or the highlights. And that will help translate, especially into a foreground. You want contrast with your middle ground, your background layer. Now I made that selection, I cut it out, but I feel like I could still use those shadows. So that's where I use Command Z and I toggle on and off. I need the darkness, but I just need to make them a little bit more distinct in their edge. And this is me just making up rock shapes, cutting them out. Sometimes that's what you do. All right. Now, this is the last technique in terms of just compositing major components that I wanted to show you. I have my pieces placed in. Now I might recompose it a little bit. I can shift all these elements around. I have auto select layer turned on. I want the perspective to make sense. I want everything to be believable. So that can often take a little bit of repositioning at the end. I'll be honest, this one doesn't really make sense. So I'm going to scale it a little differently. Put it way in the background, and then this, I'm going to broaden the sky a bit as well. Now, I'm not making huge changes because that will affect resolution if I decide to make it way bigger than it was before. All right, that looks good. Okay, now make sure my cropping lines make sense everywhere. This I have to shift just over a tiny bit. There we go. So there's no big gaps. I'm glad. Remember, you're not allowed to show like moving things, so I'm not putting that boat into my composition. Then I'm just going to cut this out finally. Okay, so this is the one other thing you can do should you need to kind of bring everything together. I'm going to take this layer that has the water in it. I'm going to find its smart layer. Is right here. I'm going to bring it on top of everything because that's the water I want. And I'm going to stretch it. Using the smart layer, just make it bigger and place that water. This is what's called a textural overlay. And for this, I am simply going to steal the water within here. Duplicate that, then I'll move my smart layer back down and hide it again. This is the first layer I composed with. It's way down there underneath my sketch. Now I take this water layer, and I'll teach you kind of the cheating trick if you have something like this. It's got this little buoy in it that I don't want. But because it's surrounded by the stuff I do want, I simply lasso around it, leaving a little bit of overlap. And then I say Edit, Fill, and under Contents, I say Content Aware at 100% normal mode. And then Photoshop will use its algorithms to fill it in with the pattern that's surrounding it. And so there's a little shadow of the buoy. I can do that to fix it too. And this was initially designed, it was actually designed by the roommate of my brother-in-law. This algorithm that's used for content aware. Adobe bought it. But it was used to remove graffiti from walls in photos. And so think of it that way. If you have a brick wall, if you have an even texture like a wall, but you have this anomaly on it, like a graffitied face, as long as there's enough wall for the computer to sample from, it can recreate that space. So that's called content aware. When you first use it, you use it way too much, and you get kind of content aware happy. But it can be very useful in those kind of circumstances. Now I have that water. I'm going to use a soft eraser at 100% opacity. really big brush, scale-wise. I'm going to soften that out because really I just want to use this texture on top of what I think of as the countertop behind this chocolate bar to make it look more like water. So I'll even take the whole opacity of the layer down. And then erase out these rocks I want to keep. So this is still just kind of collaging, but it's collaging with opacity as well. And it's not that I want to delete the countertop that's underneath. I'm combining those two textures together because I want that kind of lighting of the countertop. And we'll be doing more of that in a bit. And we'll be learning a lot about a tool that mimics that with our next project, which is called the clone stamp, where you can kind of copy one texture onto another area. All right. So I think that works pretty well. Now I'm about ready to do some color changes. So I'm not going to erase out all of these at 100% yet, because that will be kind of some fine-tuning I do later on. But I've successfully got my food item into my landscape. Now I'm going to save it. And now I really don't need all this empty space anymore. So I am going to crop it. But before I do, I might want to do a quick save. This is more just to show my process. As soon as it's done saving, it will let me. I'm going to do a quick save as a JPEG, and I'm going to rename it Assignment 1 Layout. This is optional for you. I don't require you to turn it in, but it can be helpful for you to understand the process. Save it to the desktop as a JPEG file. And that's going to put the gray background in and everything. And just before I crop it, because once I crop it, I'll lose all these edges. I just wanted to remind myself how I kind of compose these together. If I ever wanted to go back and use those smart layers and recompose it, I would be reminded. Okay, now I'm going to use the crop tool. I'm going to fit it to my guides and hit return. And it's going to save a lot of space. So the main reason we crop at this point is to focus our attention where it matters in our print area. And notice I changed my the shape. Oh, that's kind of cool. Quite a bit from my sketch. This was my original sketch and my original crop, but with my reference and how everything lined up, I extended it a little bit. And this is how all the puzzle pieces came together. So now this is my project. I can also hit Command semicolon to get rid of those guides because they can be distracting. And now I'm just trying to make this look really believable. So I'm going to save it where it is, because now it's time to start playing with color and lighting changes. Everything here looks very colorful, for the most part very sharp, and so we got to fix that a little bit. The only place I have blurry edges is in the foreground, which doesn't make a whole lot of sense yet. So, how do I fix color? Well, I kind of like the blue to the yellow to the red, but I need to make it more believable. So I'm going to start with this layer, and I have auto select layer on. And this layer just looks kind of blah. It doesn't look contrasted enough, first of all, and it also is kind of the wrong color temperature. So once I have that layer selected, I go to Image Adjustments. And these are direct adjustments. We're not doing layer adjustments yet. So I'm going to change the pixels. And the first thing I'll change are the levels. And the levels, I can deepen the shadows. And you see how that helps automatically? I mean, immediately it starts to relate more. And I can brighten the highlights, help it stand out, and I can adjust the midtones. The midtones are actually usually where I start.